So in May 2019, my wife Ellie gave birth to our youngest son, Jet. And it had been a fairly routine pregnancy until around the last 2 months when they had some concerns about his growth. But at that stage, it was nothing alarming. They weren't too worried. And the doctor said, just rest and kind of take it easy for the last 2 months, which we did. And in May, my beautiful little boy was born, and he was perfect. I just looked at him and he was this incredible little boy. And we went home and everything appeared fine. And about 2 weeks later, we went in just for a post-birth routine checkup, and they thought his color was a little bit off. So they ran some tests, and quite quickly the story started to come out that there seemed to be something quite seriously wrong with Jet. So they ran a whole bunch of tests, and he went for a whole lot of scans. And within that same day, we found out that our perfect little boy had some serious heart deformities, and he basically had a congenital condition called heterotaxy, which is some serious deformities of the heart and lungs. And he didn't actually come home. He went straight from there into ICU, and they started running just a whole bunch of tests, and sort of the full picture came out, and they said, look, your little boy is very, very ill. There are some quite dangerous, quite serious heart surgeries that we need to do. At that point, they said he would probably, if he was lucky, reach his early teens and then die. I just remember us, there was so much prayer that happened in that time. Obviously, the first thing we did was just pray and say, like, God, can you help us? Can you sustain us? Can you help this little boy of ours? We learned really to pray in that time, and our whole church learned to pray. We had an entire congregation just standing behind us and praying for this little boy, praying for miracles. When he was really, really ill, he was in the ICU, and we weren't allowed to stay there. So we would go and see our little boy in the evenings, and then we'd have to go home and sleep at home. And our son Jet was there in hospital alone. And I just prayed the one day. I was like, God, give me something. Like, give me some comfort or thing I can hold on to. And the next morning, someone phoned us and said, I just felt this word for Jet. I just felt like God wanted to say to you that he is with Jet. Like, he is with him in hospital, but not just in a way, like we know God is with us always, but their words were that Jet would have a tangible experience of Jesus, that he would actually know and feel and sense Jesus there, and that years later he would remember it, that it would actually be a real experience of having personally had Jesus with him. And I just remember the comfort that brought me of actually, my son is not alone. Like, Jesus is with him in this very real way. And I remember just praying over us as a family. Ellie and I were trying to hold down jobs and deal with this little boy in hospital and raise our other 2 sons and be involved in church. And it just felt like so many plates to keep moving all the time. And it's so precious to see how that prayer God answered, and that he preserved our marriage in such a healthy, wholesome way. He preserved my 2 little boys. Their hearts were just so secure and grounded in that time. The really interesting thing was, people would often say to us, how are you doing this? How are you actually bearing up so well? And I was so aware that we actually weren't. The only thing I knew how to do was every morning wake up and say, Jesus, help me through this day. Help me to carry this thing that I can't carry. And he did. If I look back on those 2 years, Jesus was so close. He was carrying us so well. He was carrying our family so well, even work. He carried work so well for me. But one of the real miracles was their prognosis for Jet was that he would never have a full life as a little boy, that he wouldn't be able to do many of the things other little boys did, but also that he just wouldn't reach adulthood. They said, eventually just his need for oxygen is going to overwhelm what his heart and lungs can give him, and he will fade away, and you will see him fade away. And I heard these words that many doctors were telling us, and somehow it just couldn't line up with what I was feeling in my heart and what I could feel God saying to me. And I had these 2 realities that were trying to compete with each other. There's the medical reality of where my son is, and then there's just this faith that I have that somehow God is in this and that he is going to do something. And one of the major problems with Jet was that his ventricle, the one part of his heart, was underdeveloped, and so they could never actually operate on that. They had said to us that the heart will grow, but that the ventricle is not going to spontaneously grow. What's there is what's there, and that's what they have to work with. A few months later, after us and our whole congregation praying for a miracle, we went for another scan. And in that heart scan, they suddenly saw that this operation, which previously had been impossible, that would essentially repair his heart, was now possible because this ventricle had grown. And what I loved about it is the way the doctors tried to explain it to us. They said, we have the initial scans and that ventricle is not there. We've done another scan and suddenly that ventricle is there. Ventricles don't spontaneously grow, yet somehow in this case, it did. And their exact words were, we don't have a medical explanation. But the good news is, we can now do the surgery that will save your son's life. And just that word of, we don't have a medical explanation, I was like, God, you did something here. You actually performed a miracle. You grew a part of my son's heart that all the doctors had said would not grow. And what was incredible out of that story is they managed to actually do the surgery. It was very, very high risk. They'd said to us, the chances of him making it off the table are fairly slim, and then post-operative recovery is also very dangerous, and even that he may not survive. And we felt in God like we had to go for the surgery anyway, and we did. So we trusted God. Even the day of the surgery, we just prayed. We're like, Lord, we're committing this boy to you. He's been yours from the start, so here he is. We walked out of the theater and they said, it'd be about a 4 or 5 hour surgery. And they said, just go and do something for that time. And Ellie and I looked at each other. We didn't know what to do. So we just went home and actually had a nap. It was the strangest thing to be able to go home and actually just rest and sleep while God watched over our little boy. We woke up from that nap and went into hospital, and he was there. He had survived, and the surgery had been a success. Fast forward to about 6 months later, and we took him in for a checkup. And the cardiologist who'd been with us through this whole journey, he did a whole lot of scans again, ran a whole bunch of tests, and he sat behind his desk and he took his glasses off and he had these tears in his eyes, and he just looked at me and he said, I never thought we would be here, and I never thought I'd say this, but your son is fine. Your son is fine. And he is. He's this 2.5-year-old, energetic, little healthy, beautiful boy running around. For us as a family and us as a church, it taught us to pray. And what I love about it is, in that time, I never had an assurance. God never told me that he would heal my son. That's not a word he gave me. But in praying, we changed. Our reality started to align with actually the character and the personality of God. As we committed this thing to him in prayer, we changed. We had peace that we shouldn't have had. We had an assurance and a hope in God's goodness that we shouldn't have had. And I saw answered prayers, specific prayers that we prayed, that God would intervene and heal his heart. And he did. But they were often just prayers that I didn't know how to pray. I was like, God, I don't know what to pray right now, but I'm just crying out. Will you give me something? And in those moments, he did. He gave us these precious little promises to hold on, these prophetic words of being with Jet to hold on to. And I couldn't have even prayed for that stuff had I known to. I was just crying out, and God answered it in the most beautiful and perfect way.